All right, this is the follow-up, and we are following up today on a number of panel conversations I had last year in 2020 on Georgia's Space Chat. The conversations were entitled Broadway Uncovered, Part 1, 2, and 3. And my guest today on the follow-up is none other but the great Adam Krauthamer, himself president of Local 802 AFM. Adam, thank you so much for making yourself available, and welcome to the follow-up.
Thanks for having me, George. This is a crucial subject. I appreciate the work that you've done on it and look forward to having a tough conversation.
Oh, excellent, excellent. Well, for those watching, for those listening, let me give you a little bit of a background as to what we are talking about today. I had these panel conversations on Georgia's Space Chat with a number of Black musicians and female musicians about racial inequities in the hiring processes on Broadway in musical theater and in classical music. And there has been, quite a response to those videos. So in the follow-up series of videos, I'm trying to show different perspective on the same subject, and therefore Adam has a unique vantage point, a unique perspective on this particular subject, since all he deals with as president of 802 is employment of musicians. Adam, let me open it up to you. Obviously, there is, I shouldn't say obviously, but how does the situation present itself to you? Does it present itself to you at all in terms, in terms of racial inequities when it comes to the hiring process?
Sure. Well, before I get to the hiring process, and again, I'm excited to have this conversation because it's an important one. Let me just say, like, I've seen the hiring process from sitting in the chair as a professional musician, right, for 16 years, and now I have a very different gig as president, and it's been eye-opening to see it on both sides. And I also think it's worth stating up front, and I think that this is important for there's so many different perspectives, right? That I want to acknowledge. I grew up around here in New York. I am a white man. I'm Jewish. That is not unique.
Right.
There are many of us, and our business, our education system. I was privileged enough to go to a great music conservatory and the university. I have had a built-in privilege that many other musicians, especially people of color, simply just never have, because the field isn't equal. And there is a great deal of institutionalized racism from the very start of musicians' careers, which goes back to education in the beginning, right? I think it's important, before we sort of get to the hiring piece, just to put that out there and have a full understanding that I've gotten to see things from my perspective, from a privileged point of view.
Yeah. It's important. Let me just add to that. You're making a very, very good point, because the hiring process is sort of an end result of a larger problem, a larger symptomatic problem that is happening. So I think that point is a really, really good point to make. Interestingly, hasn't come up so far in my conversations. That's really deep. Okay, sorry. Please continue.
So on the hiring part, right? I think that, and you said it, that's the most obvious part, because that's when we see, like, who got the job, who is it, what, man, woman, person of color, not, and that's really the sort of deciding factor. It really does start many, many years before that in terms of getting people there. But if we specifically look at, the outcomes of hiring and various places, there's unfortunately just not been an equitable distribution of work. It's a very complicated issue in our world, because, we all know this. We all believe that the best musician for the job is getting that job, right? It's a performance-based business.
Mm.
Nobody goes into this, that faint of heart. It's competitive, right?
Right.
But I think the real issue it is the field level within that competition.
Right.
And that has not always been the case.
Right.
And how do we actually have a process that ensures that to happen before somebody is hired?
Right.
And I don't think we've examined these things in great detail. Obviously, there's a reckoning going on across the country on all levels. Um, it breaks my heart, and it's so complicated because these issues have been around forever. This is
Yeah.
not new.
Yeah. Yeah.
We didn't invent this. And we know there's a great impetus because of the violence that's being enacted against people of color by
Yeah.
police across the country. But it's moved this conversation more into the workplace, and I think that's important. So I don't know that I could give you an end answer on terms of hiring and what we see in definition and things like that. What I know is we don't understand things well enough to even develop an educated opinion. So
Right.
one of the things that we're trying to do right now, and I know that you know this, is actually bring data into the union and study the subject of hiring and equality, because
Right.
we know it does not take a lot of analysis to say that something is wrong.
Yeah. No, I think those efforts are really important. They are a very, very good step in the right direction. It is my understanding that so far we haven't really, with 802, we haven't really had a census as such. Like 802 has not really looked at the makeup of its members and the makeup of its constituency. Which of course I have to bring this up. I know we already talked about this, but which ends up in small details like the pictures in the club room only having white musicians in them, and black musicians in New York City not even being in the pictures in the club room of 802, or if there are any, it's one picture versus 10 pictures with solely white musicians. Representation, right? All of this speaks to representation. So it's. Let me ask you this in terms of the questionnaire. This particular census, right? Is that data already available, or where are we in terms of getting all of that together?
So this is a first of its kind, brand new effort for Local 802. If the data was here, they certainly didn't show it to me. So I'm
Right.
just when I started. So, and I don't know in the 16 years before I got here that I ever saw a self-identification survey that talked about demographics.
Right.
And I simply don't know how you address any problem without studying it and having data, because you want to be able to create long-term change based on what you actually understand, not what you just think. I think where we are with the survey actually is it's open for another week. We want to make sure that people understood that it was anonymous, but also that it was very important for this to happen so that we could study it. And we look forward to putting all of that information into a report that needs to be transparent and needs to be published for our members. Going back to sort of part of your question, which was, has 802 looked at the makeup of this? There's obvious things like you pointed out, like the outcomes of pictures in the club room, and I can't speak to multiple administrations, what they did and what they analyzed. I could only speak for myself, and this was something that when I ran for office, I knew was an aspect of the union that we had to improve, because historically, to me, it wasn't just the fact that it wasn't being addressed, right? The unions do that, our union's done that with things that have been detrimental to members like technology.
Right.
And you sort of have a couple different choices when something that is going to disrupt
Mm.
comes along.
Right.
And you could choose to embrace it, you could choose to ignore it, or you do something in between.
Right.
And unfortunately, the union, at least in relation to technology, did the ignore it version.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
I this is a very different issue,
Right.
but I think one that will affect musicians across the board, and that one that there's a moral imperative, an economic imperative, an artistic imperative to deal with now, as
Yeah.
soon
Yeah.
as we can. So when we came in, I thought, well, what do we know about what's happened in the past?
Mm.
And I think to understand sort of the union's relationship with like those outcomes of pictures that look predominantly white, because that is um, a byproduct of the hiring, right? It's just a
Right.
fact.
Right.
You have to go back to the fact that the AFM had segregated locals for a long period of time. It did not cover jazz musicians,
Yeah.
well-known, famous jazz musicians like John Coltrane here in New York.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it stayed that way. I mean, not only was it wrong to be that way in the first place, it stayed that way for far too long
Right.
until they were integrated.
Right.
So it presents a problem, a reckoning problem,
Right.
right? If you've already othered people of color, what is the right way to address that historical problem? And
Right.
and I don't know that I've seen one from the union yet, to be very honest with you. I
Right.
think the data is going to sort of hopefully help us dictate what the next steps will be. So if
Right.
we go all the way back to that issue, I think that's the beginning of the reckoning.
Right.
Now, how that relates to us as a union, and why I think it's important to just think about generally, aside from just the completely unfair playing field that created,
Right.
is that frankly, musicians overwhelmingly are people of color across the United States.
Right.
That's what they look like. That's
Right.
a reality.
Right.
And if you look at the AFM, and one of the problems we've had is there's more and more professional musicians who aren't in the union and whose
Right.
work we don't cover. And
Right.
I think that there's a connection to the fact that we made a decision a long time ago to make that the other. And
Yeah.
I think there's another aspect of that that's consequential in a bylaw that the AFM has that I've asked them to examine and talked about before, where it says that you are not to do non-union work if you're a
Right.
union member, right?
Right. Right.
And that again speaks to putting people in the category of the other. Well, you know what? It's a fact that people of color do a lot of non-union work because the union never went out to cover the work of people of color.
Right.
So it's a self-perpetuating
Right.
crisis, both for people of color who should have received equal treatment, but for the union itself,
Right.
whose numbers have dropped from 30 something thousand decades ago here in New York to 7,000.
Right.
And I believe the only way to address those types of issues is to focus on the data, and it will be many, many years, but start to create a pathway to equity here.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, this makes a lot of sense. This is an interesting and fascinating part of the conversation. I had the actor Norm Lewis on one of these follow-up videos, right? He talked about exactly to what you just talked about, that he tried to put a concert, or he did put a concert up at Carnegie Hall, and it was his wish to have a mostly black orchestra ensemble, right? And when it came to the hiring, they made the discovery that a lot of these black musicians were not part of the union. They had to become part of the union in order to play Carnegie Hall, right? The argument why they were not part of the union was that because if they were part of the union, they wouldn't be able to do any outside work anymore, right? So interesting. I didn't even know that AFM had that stipulation, right? This is the first time that I'm hearing about that. Now, just to be very clear, is this something that 802 enforces? Is this something that AFM enforces? Like, just, let the audience know what the significance and what the importance of that particular stipulation is.
Sure. So this is the first hard question of like, this is the first political question, but I'm like, I want to be clear on this.
Yeah.
Look, musicians in 2021, musicians coming out of a pandemic, way before this, even for decades,
Yeah.
it has been incredibly hard to survive on just union work by the nature of the fact that there's less and less union work.
Yeah.
And it is unfortunate that the AFM hasn't realized that in order to be a professional musician, there needs to be a mix.
Right.
Equally as if not more unfortunate, they've missed the opportunity to understand, as I said, that a lot of that non-union work is what people very successful, very artistically and economically successful people of color are doing, whether it's in the hip hop world, or jazz world, or new music world, or world music, or anywhere else. It just simply was overlooked. So I would say this, like, if you don't see it being enforced, it's probably not enforced. But I have to say, I would like to see them proactively act to show members that they understand what it's like to be a professional musician and create an equitable workforce. One of the other areas, George, that is a concern to me is union leadership in order to be elected. And this is something that when we ran, became very apparent to me, to be on a board. So really to have your voice at the highest level being represented at rank and file on the executive board of the union. Right. Again, this bylaw comes into play where you must only do union work. And if that ostracizes people of color, isn't the outcome going to be that we don't have people of color in positions of representative power in our own union?
Exactly.
And it is something that has to change. And we hope to find ways to make progress with.
No, this is a fascinating take on the situation. So far, I have not heard this particular sort of vicious cycle of, you have that stipulation in the AFM contract. On the other hand, you have like a whole constituency of musicians who work outside of union work, and since that stipulation is in there, guess what? They're not part of the union. Most of them are Black. Most of them are people of color. So all of a sudden, the constituency of 802 becomes predominantly white, right? So this is a vicious cycle that hopefully you guys can, ladies and gentlemen, can figure that out, because that would certainly make a lot of sense. What you're saying is that, just to break this down for the audience, more people in the union is something that we need to look for, right? And right now, the union is not necessarily making it easier for people of color to join, and therefore the influx of people into the union is smaller. Correct?
Couldn't have said it better. You summarized that well.
I try.
And I think, it's perfect.
It makes sense. No, that makes a lot of sense.
And I think the takeaway is, and this is our responsibility here, and part of the responsibility I feel as a leader, we have the responsibility to create the inclusive environment.
Right.
It's not the responsibility of the people who've been victimized.
I so appreciate you saying that.
So, that's why, and that's not easy to do. And that's why sort of these factors that have been in the environment, these big blocks that have stopped progress are to me the ones that first have to go to just at a very, very baseline, create an inclusive environment. And then you build on an inclusive environment. That doesn't fix the
Yeah.
pre-existing issues that have
Yeah,
happened.
yeah, 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 yeah. That makes a lot of sense. I remember us having that email exchange when the first, last year, I believe, right around the murder of George Floyd, like when the first, questionnaire got sent out, and the big question was, what do you want us to do? Asked two black musicians, and I was like, this is the wrong question to ask. This is
Mhm.
not correct. You're asking the victim, you know, what do you want me to do? It doesn't work that way. You need to change your own thinking. I so appreciate you bringing this up, because that is essentially, starting from the perhaps from the AFM rule. That is something that goes into everyday occurrences, right, between musicians. That goes into everyday representation of, how do I deal with this in the pit? Like, I had a whole conversation yesterday with somebody hiring me, um, saying that this is a hard conversation to have. I want to have a band that is representative of today, of 2021, meaning I want to have a multiracial band, a multi-gender band. Um, it is difficult to even bring that up, right? For white people, it is certainly not easy for black people to be, hello, hire me. This, I'm good enough. That whole question is in and of itself already, or that assumption is already troublesome. Um, so I'm very, very. This is really good information. I think this, and I do want to point out to the audience that, before having this conversation with Adam, um, we had a conversation about having this interview, because the topic is not easy, right? And there has been already significant pushback. I mean, it's noticeable all over social media. Every now and then we have white musicians, just spewing hate. There's no other way to put that anymore, right? Um, of course it masks itself with the question of, how can this be equitable, and with the continuous threat of this is reverse racism. Reverse racism doesn't exist, okay, and certainly doesn't happen when it comes to hiring processes. Um, I so appreciate Adam being available today, and speaking out, for this and against, um, racist hiring practices. Um, I am fully aware that this is not an easy topic, and I think, kudos to you, Adam, for taking this on. This has not always been the way 802 has dealt with this.
So, it's hard to speak to what things were going on at different times. So I
Oh
can
yeah, of course.
only speak for myself. Um, I know as a union, the majority of our members support making changes here, right?
Yeah,
I know it, and it's our job to lead it. Change is not easy.
no,
Change requires um, people standing up, raising their voice, requires leadership internally to put forth new policy. It requires an external prevailing force
yeah,
to to support that change and make sure that it happens in a transparent, accountable way. This goes from any change as small as an inconsequential law to something as large as civil rights, where
yeah,
it never would have happened without the civil rights leaders and movement. Um, and it wouldn't have happened without the right leadership finally in the United States government. And,
right.
everybody knows it took far too long. So, it's something that I want to encourage 802 members to think of in a way to first listen, ask the right question. You brought up, I myself was searching for
Mm.
you know, what is the right question. There's going to be mistakes that are made. I don't think that those should scare us off from going through the process, right? And
Right.
making sure we're bringing in the right voices to listen to them, going back to that, studying the data.
Yeah.
I don't think that there is any intent here not to improve the system,
Right.
but I do understand that there is a lot of fear
Yeah.
and fear of change.
Yeah.
Um, and I want to assure people that we can manage this type of change together, and it doesn't have to be fearful.
Right.
It's musicians work together all the time in a way that creates a unique bond that very few other workforces have. And we sort of need to transfer this conversation through that understanding and just create better outcomes. And
Oh yeah.
it's not just about, you know, how do we adjust the hiring process?
Right.
Frankly, you know, the pool from which people are being chosen from, and we said this sort of at the beginning, can only be greatly improved by making investments in terms of making sure that the education system provides for everyone in an equitable way as well. And that goes back to when we're kids and just start our instrument, and the fact that people don't get the same access to even having their own instrument to own it, let
Right.
alone renting it, whether you have a band program in your school or not.
Yeah.
You know, and it's those things I want to make sure we also as a community focus on, that because it's more just as important to sort of address what is right in front of us, right? From an employment perspective, we have to improve things for the next few generations.
Of course, of course. No, I totally agree. I think you're touching on a number of points that are really important to keep in mind. Number one, that all of this is connected. Okay, the strength of a union, the outreach to all its constituencies, all people within the constituency is connected. The education that leads into people becoming musicians, therefore becoming union members, therefore strengthening the union again. All of this is connected. There, all of this is one thing. I don't remember ever having heard that these connections are so strong and so predominant. I haven't been to all the Zoom calls and all the meetings and all of that. It's this, everybody's got another, several lives to live. That's just life in itself. But I have not heard that argument made, and I'm so grateful that you are making that right now. This is, strengthening the union is has a lot to do with all of it. Education, making sure the education is equitable, making sure that hiring processes are equitable. All of this goes to the same topic, and that is something that perhaps people who are fearful of change need to keep in mind, right? That you are actually working against yourself if you resist this change, if you resist this opening up, right? You're not making the union any stronger. You're making it weaker.
I think that's important. And I also think that, look, when it comes down to it, trust is everything, right?
Right.
We have to take these steps together, and we have to trust each other.
Right.
And there's a large group of people, rightfully so, that don't trust the union. And there are
Right.
people of color.
Right.
And it's because, frankly, we haven't given that community a lot of reasons to trust us.
Right.
And I don't think that needs to exist that way moving forward into the future. And I think we could build a stronger union by providing trust there. But on the other side of the coin, there are people who the union has been very successful for and do trust us. And they need to trust their fellow colleagues and fellow musicians that we could navigate this issue together, because that's the only way to actually get to do it. And one other thing I wanted to say, and just I've seen it firsthand with access and education and the arts. We all know that when you're a professional musician, you get, if you do it right, you get the power, right?
Right.
You get it. You've seen people smile, laugh, cry, hurt, feel better
Right.
based on what we have the power to do.
Yeah.
That is real power,
Yeah.
right? And you know, kids' connection to music, when they first get into that environment, it has the power to change their lives, literally change their lives,
Right.
if it's given to them
Right.
in the right way. And not
Right.
everybody gets that option. And I was lucky enough to teach at the MAP program at Juilliard, and it's a program that really makes sure that people of color are brought into Juilliard and prioritized from around the boroughs. And I've seen kids there. The difference between having their own instrument versus a rental from the school band program that meets once a week, and their face, their whole demeanor when they get to take that instrument home,
Right.
and that it's theirs.
Yeah.
It has the ability to change people's lives. And I think there's a connection to that, to what we do, to the subject that we're talking about, obviously, that can only improve things. And that's why I like, to me, you have to focus on all parts of this.
Yeah, most definitely. Well, listen, I'm not going to keep you much longer. I so appreciate you taking the time today. I know you have a very, very busy schedule, especially now with pandemic and possible reopening and future going ons and all of that. I mean, I cannot thank you enough. I think this has been a really, really good information, a really good conversation, and very informative. Any parting words about the again? Maybe we should repeat when this questionnaire is going to be finished, when the data survey is going to be made public.
Yeah. So the survey, I believe, closes at the end of this weekend. Again, I encourage everybody to do it. The process will literally make our union stronger.
Yeah.
And data is power. Yeah. Right? Everybody knows that at this point. And we need that. I don't know exactly, we have a third-party data scientist who works through the results and then gets us summaries. We haven't even gotten to that part. I think it'll probably be a couple months based on their schedule. But, we're going to have a report. We're going to need to engage in the report and have an accountable conversation here that's not fear-based, and see what the next steps are. And, I simply want to just encourage members that if they want to work on issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, contact me. We have a great group of people who are working on it on a regular basis, just like you did, George. And if there's things that we're doing that you don't think are right, even more important, contact us. For the most part, it's because we just don't know what we're doing wrong, because we're trying to do the right thing. But, we're going to have to get through this process by listening to each other and working together for the right outcomes. And it's going to take many, many years, but I'm here to make sure that process continues.
And I so appreciate you being here. Well, listen, Adam Krauthamer, stay safe, stay sane out there. Much love to your family. And, hopefully, in the not too distant future, I'll see you on the strip. We'll just keep our fingers crossed for, again, this upcoming reopening, or, the end of the intermission, is what it's called right now. Which makes a lot of sense. But listen, Adam, take care. And once again, thanks so much for being here today.
I'm looking forward to seeing you in person, George. And thank you for all the work you've done.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you.